Welcome to Scripture Shared. This season, we're going to focus on the lessons that we learn from women in Scripture. So many of our biblical narratives seem to be driven by the actions and decisions of men, but when you look more closely, you'll see that women have a far more central role than is generally acknowledged. So we're going to get started this week by talking about some of the courageous women that we find in the Bible. So one of the things we know about courage is that it is not just about the absence of fear. It's about taking action despite our fear. And we see these women in Scripture, and they have demonstrated for us how they take action even in the midst of hard things or in spite of fear. And I think there's three keys that sort of ties them together and defines their courage. The first one is that these women often challenge and defy cultural norms. And they lived in a time when women didn't speak up that often, or they didn't have power just automatically, and they had to claim it in certain situations. So who are some of the women that we see that defy cultural norms?
Well, the first one that comes to my mind, generally when I think of courageous women, is Deborah.
Yeah.
The judge, and when you don't ordinarily think of women as warriors, but that's exactly what she is, and she, became a great leader and spoke out for Israel against the norms around her in that sense. And in a battle against Sisera was victorious. And it was another woman who helped her as Sisera fled into Jael's tent, and when he fell asleep, she put an end to him with a tent bag through the head. Yeah. So it's one of those. It's one of my favorite stories to read to children, or actually to youth, because they go, "Wow, that's in the Bible," and you go, "Yeah, it is, really is." That's and really that is an unusual thing. You just wouldn't experience it, and you were talking about trying to put these things in context. And I often think about the stories we've seen of women in Afghanistan or those places where the norms are so clear, and how much courage it took. And really, in many ways, how countercultural Scripture is, just to have this many women who do this many significant things in Scripture.
Absolutely.
A little bit of a different vibe than Deborah, but similarly courageous as Ruth, and it's a classic story, of course. And if you read the setup for Ruth, you can kind of, if you were in kind of that context of when it was written, you could think like, oh, I see where this is going. Ruth's going to go her own way, and Naomi's going to go her own way. But Ruth hitches her wagon to kind of a downwardly mobile person. It doesn't seem like there's a way out. And so that's kind of the cultural norm she breaks, that you would kind of expect her, it's going to be rough out there, but you got to find your own way. But she's like, no, your God's going to be my God. We're going to be together. I'm going to walk with you. We're going to go back to Israel. And she's not an Israelite. So she kind of defies all expectation there, and is courageous for her to be like, no, I'm with you. I'm connected to you. And so she vouches for and bids into that relationship, rather than being like, yeah, you're nothing now, so I'm going to go find a new husband and go somewhere else or whatever. She kind of defies that. So, we see kind of two cultural norms broken there. But what are some cultural norms kind of today that are in the way of us being courageous? What are some of the things that we face today that prevent folks from acting in courage?
Well, it's 2,000 years after some of these stories, longer actually, after the Old Testament stories, and we still have gender norms that I think are really limiting. I know there have been times that I have felt really limited in things that I have had opportunity to do, or things that were available to me, and I've had to have courage to ask for those things, or to take advantage of certain opportunities, or sort of grab them by the horns.
There's no doubt that there still remains a different path or a different expectation, I think. And I would say sort of the flip side is that, if I said, I want to go to college and grow up and stay home and take care of children, the social norm for a man would be, why do you have no ambition? What's your problem?
Right.
They're still there without question.
And then you might experience some type of like shunning or exclusion. That's
Right.
another social norm I think a lot of us deal with, is like what puts us in the main path where we don't get shunned, and what are the things that we would have to be courageous to do, even if people say, I'm going to exclude you because that doesn't make sense, or,
Right. You've got to follow where God's calling you.
Yeah.
And that takes courage.
Yeah. So what's another component of courage? Like, what is something that these women show us that we need to be courageous?
Well, I think part of it is you to speak out when it would be easier to be silent. It's the old saying. It doesn't take bad people to do bad things. It takes good people to just not say anything when they do. And I think that's one of the things, is to be willing to be the person who speaks against the prevailing norm around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what most people do, the good people do, is that they freeze, right? We just get too
Right.
fearful, and nobody actually takes action. And it's interesting because Deborah is one of these people that continues to do what she's called to do, even in the face of people around her freezing. So Barak is her military commander, and he says, I won't go into battle without you. I'm scared to go into battle without you, right? I love, this is in Judges 4, and he says, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And so she said, I will surely go with you. However, she says this, the road you're on will not lead to your glory, because the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. So that's Jael at that point. But she basically says to Barak, you're too scared, so you're not going to experience victory. And even though you're scared of this military battle, I'll go with you and I'll step into it.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. A New Testament example is the Canaanite woman that Jesus has a conversation with. And of course, we get the breaking cultural norms here. They're culturally not really supposed to connect with each other or talk to each other. But then she does what you kind of talked about, Tom. She advocates for the other Gentile people.
Yeah.
Jesus says this kind of weird thing. It's in Matthew 15. He's like, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. This is what she says in response to him, that he's kind of grouped her in this group of kind of, not good people. They're kind of the outsiders or whatever. And she is like, no, Jesus, like, even we deserve something from you. Even we should be paid attention to. And so she takes action. She doesn't say like, you're right, Jesus, I'm nothing. She says, no, you have to notice us. And so it kind of just is calling to mind for me that like there are things for which I'll advocate, that I'll be adversarial. I'll use my voice. I'll stand out for. There are other things maybe like, I probably should have stood up then, but it's easier for me to stay silent, or it's easy for me to not act. But what are the sorts of things that you would stand up for, be courageous for, take action for? There's that Shia LaBeouf video that went around for a while of him being like, yesterday you said today, do it, just do it or whatever. He's like kind of calling us to action, like you should just do it. And I think about that often, like, okay, what are those things? And I'm like, oh yeah, yesterday I said I was gonna do this and I didn't. Like, what are those things that you'd stand up for, be courageous for?
I think a lot of times I find myself standing up or being courageous on behalf of people I love more than on behalf of myself. Like I might let myself just sort of go with the flow, or if something happens to me and and if I get a no and I would have to really be courageous to push back on that no, sometimes I just kind of am like, okay, we'll try again another time. But if it's like if my child is sick and I need them to see a specialist, I will turn over every single stone that I can to find the right doctor. I will challenge the insurance company to no end on that. And so I have found myself sometimes when I receive a no and it would really require courage, or if everybody else around me is just stopped and silent, and I'm doing something on behalf of someone I love, then I'm more motivated to do it.
I guess I think about who am I listening to, and so if it's something that I just feel like this is who I am, this is what I need to be doing. If I can stay in that place as opposed to hearing all the other voices, it makes it so much easier. So to stand up for what I believe about some issue in a conversation with someone, if I can put aside caring about whether I'm convincing them or listening to them and just sort of articulating where my heart is, I found that people are generally responsive. They're not don't always agree with me, but there is a certain respect that comes from saying, I've got to say what I think, and I've got to say what I believe God calls me to say.
That actually goes into the third thing. Courage really requires vulnerability. Brene Brown has this thing that she says about courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. So like you bringing your full self to these conversations, us letting ourselves be seen and everything that we believe requires a lot of vulnerability. It's so much easier to keep the armor up around ourselves, I think, and not have anybody peg us in a certain way and just sort of go with the flow. And so I think a lot about Esther. She sort of had a hidden identity for much of her time. I mean, for her whole relationship with the king and her time of living in the palace, is that he didn't know that she was Jewish, and she had to reveal herself in hopes of saving her people. She didn't even know if it would work. But can you imagine how vulnerable like she felt like she had to be to finally come clean and say, okay, I'm not even who you believed I was, and here's what I need from you.
Right. And I think, too, I think she also realized she might get found out.
Right.
So there was both. I mean, I think we always have to be aware that everybody's motivations are mixed sometimes. And so you need a little help sometimes to force you to do what you know to be right.
Yeah, I agree about that. What about Abigail? She's got an interesting story. She is the wife of someone who is going after David, who's really mad at David. And she goes out and tries to basically barter a deal.
Yeah, she makes a deal. And what I love about her story is that it isn't this story of a courageous stand for what's right or what's wrong. It's like, all right, let's see if we can figure something out here.
Right.
And I think we live in a time when people, for lack of a better word, compromise is viewed as weak. And in many ways, compromise is a very strong, courageous thing. It's easy to just say, I'm going to stand up for what's right, and I really don't care what happens.
Right.
Just as long as I stand up for what's right, I can pat myself on the back. And I posted the right thing on Facebook that I was on that team, and it didn't make a bit of difference, and it didn't help anything, but I sure felt good about myself, as opposed to saying, all right, I'm going to get in the trenches, and I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to figure it out. And that's what she does. She says, I'll go out and we'll see if we can stop people from killing each other here.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether she felt like David was right or wrong, but she apologized on his behalf.
Yeah, and really a lot of this was she was just trying to save her own family.
Yeah, right.
Some of that, like the mixed motive thing, is she's saying this is both a wrong thing in general to have this battle, and also please spare my family. And so I think we kind of really see there what motivates us in our courage is, like you said, not always being a justice issue.
Right.
But it does take more courage to make a difference than to make a point, and we lose
Exactly.
that so often.
That's right. I think that's the point. That you said that very well.
All of these women have a deep devotion to God, and I really think that's part of what drives their courage as well. And I just wonder what role you feel like your own faith plays in your courage.
It sounds like kind of Sunday school to me, but like if God is for us, who can be against us thing? They're like, okay, or Brian Zahn put it a different way, says like, don't blame something on yourself when you can blame it on Jesus. They're like, if you can lean on things that Jesus stood for and Jesus cared about, if you have trust and faith in Jesus, if you're kind of attached to Jesus, then you can be courageous because Jesus is taking care of it, and you can rely on what he did and what he's done. And I say that out loud, knowing that it's easier said than done, but that's kind of the foundation of it, is that like, oh yeah, like Jesus died for this, or yeah, Jesus preached about this, or he taught this, and I can rely on that. And I don't have to say like, I came up with this really great idea to be more just or to be better to people or whatever. I can say, no, we have an example, and people, won't have to reinvent the wheel. It can lean on 2,000 years of people following Jesus, and this faith that we inherit enables us to be courageous people. So,
I think in terms of, if I have an experience that becomes so clear to me that this is what's the right thing to do, and that makes the presence of God in that situation so tangible for me that I don't worry about is this scary, or am I going to get in trouble, or how is this going to come out even. It's more like in this moment I don't feel like there's an alternative because God's on here, and if I come across someone who reaches out for help, it is difficult for me to say, I'm sorry, I can't right now. I'm, whatever, because it's just so obvious that that person, we have a saying all the time, Dee and I do. I said, well, could be Jesus, right? That could be Jesus, because it could be the least and last and lost, and that could be Jesus, so you better be careful. So that's how it kind of comes into my mind. It gives me the courage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know that as Christ followers, we're all going to face setbacks that require us to be courageous as well. So I hope when you're talking with your group this week, y'all will be thinking about what it is that draws you into courage, even when everything around you is pushing you away from it. I hope you have a great discussion.